Hi everyone, hope you all are doing great. My name is Dr. Amar Odare and I'm a radiologist. Today, I'm sharing a recording from our recent radiology webinar. If you wish to join us live for these, I shall leave links to our social media groups in the description section. Make sure you visit radiogyan.com and subscribe to the Radio Gyan YouTube channel for more radiology content. This was a female patient who presented with long-standing pelvic pain. We did an MRI for her. She initially had an ultrasound. We saw something on the ultrasound. We saw a cystic lesion with internal echoes. We were not sure exactly what it was. So what we did is we went ahead and did the MR. So we have three sequences here, starting from the left. The first sequence is a T1 weighted sequence. You see that the subcutaneous fat is hyperechoic and even the pelvic fat is hyperechoic. We don't see the bladder, but we don't see any T2 hyperintense fluid in the bowel. So this is a T1 sequence. The second sequence is a T2 weighted sequence. And the third sequence is a T1 fat saturated sequence. So if you compare the first and the third sequence, you see that whatever the subcutaneous fat is, that has been suppressed and that appears dark. What we see here is a multiloculated T1 hyperintense lesion in the left adnexa, which shows hypointensity on T2, which is the upper portion is T2 hyperintense, while the lower portion is T2 hypointense. And on fat saturated images, it is appearing hyperintense. So that suggests that this doesn't have fat in it. So a lesion that is T1 hyperintense but does not have fat in it has this signal on T2. So what would be your differential for this? You can chat in your answers and we'll see if you guys if anyone is getting it. Okay, so okay, a few people have got it right. I don't know if others are still signing in or is there is some lag. Okay, so everybody has got the right answer. So this is the typical imaging appearance of a endometrioid cyst, endometrioma, and a clinical name for this entity is a chocolate cyst. So just to revise the imaging findings, a T1 hyperintense left adnexal cyst, which shows T2 hypointensity, gradual T2 hypointensity, and on the fat saturated T1 images, it is hyperintense. So this was a case of a left adnexal endometrioma. So yeah, so somebody has said T2 shading sign. So you are right. So this is known as this typical appearance on T2 of a cystic lesion in the adnexa is known as T2 shading. What is the T2 shading sign and what causes it? We will discuss it in our lecture. Okay, so we will move on to the discussion. I'll just go through the images once again for everyone so that they are able to appreciate whatever findings that I have discussed. So T1 hyperintense lesion in the adnexa with T2 shading, and it does not suppress on T1 fat saturated images. So we'll discuss a few points about endometriosis. So what is endometriosis? So endometriosis is functional endometrial glands outside the uterus. Now, if these glands are present outside the uterus, just like the endometrium in the uterus, these are susceptible to cyclical ovarian, cyclical hormonal changes. So these endometrial deposits, they bleed, and when they bleed in an atypical location, they can give rise to hematomas and endometriomas. The pathophysiology, so this we see them typically in the reproductive age group. The symptoms for these patients are chronic pain and infertility. And the pain, I'll tell you, is this is a very clinically relevant point. We don't see patients regularly, so we are not aware of the clinical findings. But the pain in these patients can be very bad, like to the point where I have seen the clinical history notes where the pain was so much that the patient had suicidal and self-harm tendency. Like she was not able to bear the pain, and it was not diagnosed. It was not being optimally treated. So be aware that chronic pain and chronic pain is a very important symptom of endometriosis. Okay, coming to the pathophysiology, there are multiple theories, but the most common accepted theory is uh, that of spread via the during the menstrual cycle, retrograde flow during the menstrual cycle. What happens is that blood flow, while it goes into the while there is menstrual bleeding, some of it gets disseminated in the peritoneum, some of it can get deposited in the ovary and other adjacent structures. So once we understand the pathophysiology, we know that that's why the most common location for endometriosis is superficial endometriosis, where we see deposits in the peritoneum. These we do not see on imaging. Rarely, if it becomes large enough, we may be able to see, but the most common type of endometriosis is superficial endometriosis. The next common site is ovarian, which we see commonly, and that was our case. And the last one is deep pelvic endometriosis, which not a lot of people are aware about, and we'll talk about it in our class. So endometriosis on ultrasound will be seen as a well-defined hypoechoic lesion. And like all ovarian lesions on ultrasound can be challenging, especially if you don't do a transvaginal exam. But the important points that you look in a lesion to call it endometriosis are low level internal echos and echogenic wall foci. So low level internal echos are these small tiny foci which are due to chronic blood products, and that is the buzzword that the examiner is looking for. Like in case if you get a case of endometriosis in your exams, that is the word you have to use, that it's low level internal echos. Okay, and then the next thing that you have to look out while you're doing the ultrasound are these echogenic wall foci. So what happens is that you see these pinpoint wall echogenic foci in the wall. These are thought to be cholesterol deposits, but they can be due to multiple factors. They can be due to chronic blood products, but these are very specific for uh, endometriosis. So make sure that when you're doing ultrasound and like you see a ovarian cyst, you look for these echogenic wall foci. They are the single best predictor for endometriosis. Uh, no vascularity in the lesions or the septations. That is another important point. This is a textbook picture. This is from RUMAC. You see these multiple appearances of endometriomas. Look at the first image, and this is the typical image of an endometrioma. You see these low-level internal echoes. There are these echogenic wall foci. Sometimes, because the blood products are in various stages, you may get fluid levels. The third image is again a similar one, and the rest are also endometria, the spectrum of endometriosis. Coming to the differential diagnosis on ultrasound. So this is a companion case. I'd like to have a look at this case, and I'll tell you the history. This patient presented with acute pain, and this was the ultrasound image. Can anybody chat in? What do you think the answer for this one is? Is this endometriosis? Is it not endometriosis? What other differential would you like to give in this case? Okay, we have some answers in the chat. Okay, perfect. So as people have rightly pointed out in the chat, this was a case of hemorrhagic cyst. The differential or just on the basis of ultrasound can be a bit difficult, but here are a few points which can help us to distinguish endometriosis from hemorrhagic cyst. So hemorrhagic cyst will have an acute history. Over a period of time, it will have more complex appearance as the blood products evolve. The fibrin in the hemorrhagic cyst can simulate the septa in endometriosis, but the fibrin strands are very thin as compared to the septa in endometriomas. The other important point, as I said, these will not have those echogenic wall foci, and they will resolve in 4 to 6 weeks. And from a history perspective, these patients will have a acute history. As I told you, whenever you hear the word endometrioma, the first thing that should come to your mind is chronic pain. So if you have an acute history and you don't see those echogenic wall foci, this would more be likely to be a hemorrhagic cyst. But you don't stop there. You always recommend ultrasound in 4 to 6 weeks to confirm that this has resolved. Okay. So before we talk about MRI, I'll just have a word over CT. Many a times we get patients who present with ovarian lesions on CT. It is very difficult to diagnose endometrioma on CT. But a useful clue that I have found is that these patients will have thick walls. The contents may not be hyperdense, but thick, ragged walls is something which I found an important distinguishing feature for endometriomas. Many a times they are being confused for malignancy, and the next best step is MRI. MRI, because of its higher resolution and multiple sequences, can help distinguish endometrioma from other ovarian lesions. Okay, so how do we evaluate endometriosis on MRI? The first thing is about the sequence. We do not need post-contrast sequences most of the times. Always and always include a T1 fat saturated sequence, as I showed you, because that will help distinguish other T1 hyperintense lesions. Can anybody tell me what other T1 hyperintense lesion can we see in the adnexa? Okay, a young patient presenting with, okay, everybody is like, yeah, you guys are too good. So as you all have pointed out, a dermoid cyst is a common adnexal pathology which can be T1 hyperintense. A hemorrhagic cyst can also be, but it's mostly heterogeneous. So if we want to distinguish a dermoid cyst from endometriosis and even hemorrhage, we need to have a T1 fat sat sequence. Okay, now what are the imaging features? We may see T1 hyperintensity because of the blood products. An important point to remember here is that the staging of blood outside the brain does not follow the same T1, T2 pattern strictly. So I would not put in, say, acute or subacute or early late subacute bleed in anywhere apart from the brain, depending on the T1, T2 pattern. It does follow a little bit, like for example, if you see hemosiderin, obviously you know that it's chronic blood, but remember that we should not give early, late, subacute and all those timelines for blood anywhere else than the brain. Okay, coming to the T2 shading sign. So T2 shading sign is defined as a cyst that is hyperintense on T1 and it becomes hypointense on T2 weighted images. So that is the definition of T2 shading. So why is it important and how is it very specific for endometriomas? So what happens is that if you remember when we discussed the pathophysiology, we talked about how these endometrioid deposits can bleed cyclically responding to the menstrual cycle. So what happens is that the blood here is in various stages of various chronicities, and this bleeding is chronic. So that is the reason why you get this typical appearance in endometriomas versus any other hemorrhagic lesions. So for example, if you have a large hemorrhagic follicle or a hemorrhagic cyst, you will not get this appearance. So that's the reason why the chronic nature of blood and the cyclicality of bleeding gives rise to T2 shading. So if you get a case in your exam and if you talk about T2 shading, so that's a buzzword for sure. But if you talk about the pathophysiology and why is that typical appearance, you'll get extra points for sure. The other important feature that you have to look on MRI is for a deep pelvic endometriosis. So, because what can happen is that some of the menstrual blood can spill in the peritoneum. These endometrioid deposits can get deposited in various peritoneal spaces. Now, what happens is that the surgeons will treat the endometriomas in the ovaries. Like for example, if it's a large endometrioma, they will operate it, but they will leave behind these deep pelvic endometriosis, which can cause recurrent pain for the patient. It's very difficult to identify on MR, but if you have that T1 fat saturated sequence, you may see these plaque-like deposits in the peritoneal spaces, especially along the uterosacral ligaments and in the rectovaginal pouch. In my experience, the rectouterine pouch and the rectosigmoid region, that's the common area where we see these deposits. Some more features of endometriosis, which I forgot to tell you, was like on CT, you may not be able to see the bleeding, but what you can see is the kissing ovary sign. Does anybody know what is the kissing ovary sign? Okay, let's see if anybody is chatting in their answer. So does anybody know? What happens is that whenever you think of endometriosis, think of adhesions. Because of this chronic blood and blood products, what happens is that the pelvic structures, they are stuck to adjacent bowel loops and including the ovaries. So yeah, so Sumaya did get it right. So what happens is that because of the blood products along the ovarian surface or in the peritoneum, the ovaries are stuck to each other or to the uterus in the midline. In our case, ovaries commonly you see along the pelvic side wall, and if you see our case, the ovary is very deep posteriorly and in the midline. So if there is bilateral endometriosis, the ovaries can be stuck to each other and the uterus, and that is known as the kissing ovary sign. So on you can see them on MR and CT as well, but on CT it is an important clue if you don't see any other sign. Endometriosis can be very challenging. It can mimic tumors. I've seen these being chased as malignancies. The patient undergoes unnecessary stress because of the diagnosis and the multiple investigations. And the issue with endometriosis is that it also causes a raised CA125 level. It's very difficult to distinguish clinically. So MR imaging is the modality of choice, and it has a very high sensitivity and specificity above 90% to diagnose endometriosis. So whenever you see ovarian pathology on CT, if you are not sure if it doesn't have the typical bilateral cystic appearance, and if you have these other features, the ovaries are stuck, there is some wall thickening, and on ultrasound you have those low level internal echoes with wall foci, think about endometriosis and recommend an MRI, because the gynacs will not do an MRI for all patients. Okay. Now moving on to our last slide, there are a few pearls to diagnose endometriosis on MRI. That'll revise our talk. And if you have to take back one slide from the entire presentation, this is the one slide that you can remember. So first, include a T1 weighted fat saturated sequence. Number two, if you see multiple T1 hyperintense lesions in the ovaries, they are very specific for endometriomas. STIR sequence can be misleading because it may not suppress all of the mature cystic teratoma or endometriomas. So avoid giving your diagnosis only on the basis of STIR sequence. Restricted diffusion can be seen in endometriomas, and the reason for that being endometriomas as you know, they are basically blood products. So they can have restricted diffusion, especially if they are in the subacute phase. If you see hematosalpinx, that's another very specific sign for pelvic endometriosis. Interesting point, which even I was not aware. I read about it while I was preparing for the lecture, is that wherever there is obstruction of antegrade menstrual flow, it can increase the risk of endometriosis. So can anybody think about a cause for obstruction of endometriosis? obstruction of the menstrual flow? Perfect. Okay. So yeah. So if there's a patient who has a congenital ovarian anomaly, such as a vaginal septum or an imperforate hymen, as somebody rightly pointed out, that can be a precipitating factor for endometriosis. So if you see endometriosis in a young patient, that can be one of the precipitating factors. Okay, so endometriomas can transform to clear cell or endometrioid epithelial ovarian carcinomas. Clinically, it is very difficult to distinguish this malignant transformation because CA125 levels are raised in benign endometriomas as well. There is a specific biomarker for that. You can read about it, but on imaging, what you will see is enhancing mural nodules. An important point from a planning perspective is that always do subtraction images in cases of pelvic female pelvis MRIs, because T1 hyperintensity can simulate contrast enhancement on post contrast images. So the basic funda is that if a lesion is inherently T1 hyperintense, you will not be able to say whether it's enhancing or not enhancing if you don't do subtraction. So subtraction images are a must. Then the other point is solid fibrotic masses of endometriomas are easily overlooked. I'm sure at least 50% of you never looked for these deposits in the rectovaginal pouch or along the uterosacral ligaments. So always make sure that you look for T1 hyperintensities commonly around these locations. Solid invasive endometriosis in the posterior cervix, in the posterior uterus or in the rectovaginal pouch can simulate posterior segmental adenomyosis. Adenomyosis is a condition where you see endometrial glands in the myometrial tissues. They are often associated, but they may or may not be always present. We'll discuss adenomyosis in another class. And the last point is that in pregnant females, these endometriomas can have all kinds of weird appearances. So just like the endometrium in the uterus, the endometrium in these endometriomas can be stimulated by various pregnancy-related hormones, and that can give rise to different, like a typical appearance, which also includes enhancement in mural nodules. So in a pregnant patient, it's always important to be aware that endometriomas can have a typical appearance. Okay, so that ends our talk, and if anybody has any question, we can answer that in the next 5 minutes. I'll go over the chat and see if anybody has had asked anything. Okay, so someone has asked, can HU values help on CT? HU values can definitely be helpful on CT, but unfortunately, in my experience, they are not that reliable because it's chronic blood and it is not. In cases of acute hemorrhage, say in the brain, because most of it is of a similar chronicity, HU values are really helpful. But because of the cyclical and chronic nature of bleeding, HU values may not be helpful. Hope you guys liked the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for all future video updates. If you have any suggestions, you can leave them in the comments section. Thank you.